went from the police department into the FBI by a very interesting route. A bunch of us policemen were in the coffee shop in the police station, and the subject of conversation was, what does it take to be an FBI agent? And each guy had a different opinion. And I finally says, this is ridiculous. None of us know.
Yeah.
You're just guessing. And I said, I'm going to go up to the nearby field office and I'm going to ask. So I went up and asked the local FBI agent, what does it take? What's the requirements? And he says, I don't know.
Oh,
He says, the requirements change all the time. He says, I can't keep up. He says, why don't you go over and talk to the recruiter in the San Francisco office, and he'll tell you what it takes. I said, okay. And he says, oh, by the way, wear a tie. He said, wear a tie. So I went over and I talked to the San Francisco recruiter, and his answer was, I don't know. He says, the requirements change so frequently. Sometimes they want lawyers, sometimes they want scientists, sometimes they want accountants. He says, I think they're almost always hire ex-military officers, but sometimes I hire ex-school teachers. So he says, I don't know. He says, fill out this form and I'll send it to Washington, and then I'll give you the answer. So the next thing I know is I'm being accepted. It was an application.
Were you wanting a specific position? Were you just kind of curious? Why did you want to make that change?
Well, the FBI was a very esteemed investigative agency, and I thought, well, if I'm going to be in law enforcement, I might as well shoot for the top.
Yeah.
The basic training was, I think, 3 months, September, October, November, maybe 3 or 4 months. And the granny and the kids lived in this house. My mother.
They were all born at that point, or no?
No. Basin and Terry, they were both born before I graduated from San Francisco State. Janine was born while I was a policeman here. And then Judy was born in my second year of FBI.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were doing your training for 4 months in Washington.
And I enjoyed the basic training school. In those days, part of it was in Washington, D.C. Field office, and part of it was down at the Marine Corps base in a Marine barracks. Nowadays, there's a big, huge academy, strictly FBI academy. But there was a lot of constitutional law, a lot of physical fitness, a lot of information about what kinds of cases the FBI investigated. It's not very commonly known, but a special agent, the special is a legal term meaning limited authority. A general agent would have authority over everything, but a special agent only has limited authority. And I think in those days it was 260 specific laws that we investigated. So we learned about what those laws were and how to investigate them.
What kinds of things? More like violent crime or wire fraud?
Well, all aspects of interstate crime, like interstate transportation, a stolen vehicle, kidnapping.
And what position were they preparing you for in that training?
The whole thing, though, that was wide open. Any job in the FBI had to go through the same basic training. There was no specific training at that time.
So where did they spit you out? Where did they put you?
Well, after graduation from the FBI Academy, my first office was San Antonio, Texas. And the procedure during those years was that new agents spent only 1 year in their first office, then got transferred to a...
Why?
Well, FBI rules always didn't make sense. The why, I think the philosophy was that as a newcomer, you might make mistakes, and if you moved, you could leave those mistakes behind.
What was the learning curve like moving from Berkeley Police to FBI in Texas?
Well, I think in those days we didn't have much furniture, so the move was easy. We rented a house. After a short while, as Granny frequently likes to do, she says, "Oh, there's a better house for rent down the street. Let's move over there." So we moved once when we were in San Antonio.
Was the culture very much the same between the two institutions, or was it pretty different?
Yeah, there wasn't much difference between California and Texas. One thing that was a surprise for me is how hot it got in the summer. It got so hot, it was just amazing.
And humid.
If you were walking in the shade of a building and turned onto the street and getting into the sunshine is like getting hit by a car. It just wham. And I learned also that if you had to park the car to go do some part of your job, if you parked your car in the sun, you couldn't get back in. It would be just too hot to get in. And some agents in that part of the world secretly put air conditioners in the bureau car.
They didn't have it.
No, they didn't have air conditioning in every car. Few cars had air conditioning in those days. But like all good bureaucracies, when they found out in Washington that an agent had put an air conditioner in his bureau car, they made him take it out.
Mm-hmm. How did those kind of rules feel? Like you said, a lot of them didn't make sense. What was it like to work in that kind of environment?
Well, I think the average field FBI agent had the idea that the job get done in spite of Washington, not because of the Washington leadership. Well, let's go into the sequence. 1 year in San Antonio, got sent to Indianapolis for my second year. From there, I got transferred to Monterey to the language school. I had 6 months of Spanish training.
Did you know any Spanish before that?
I had Spanish in intermediate school. I had Spanish in high school and didn't learn a thing. So the 6 months of language training, it was the Army language school. And it was a good technique of teaching. And I think I learned quite a bit. I was far from fluent, but I learned to
Pero
speak.
podría comunicar.
Yeah. And then I was sent from language school to Washington, D.C., and they assigned me to a squad that was all switchboards, and we were listening in wiretaps. And it was almost all foreign embassies in Washington, D.C. we were listening to. And one of my favorite stories was I arrive at this new squad. First day, the guys tell me, he says, "You're just out of language school, and we're going to put you on this board. And what you're going to find is that you're not going to understand much because you just don't speak Spanish. So it's going to take a long time to listening and listening." So sure enough, I sit down and get the earphones on. I don't understand anything. A word here and a word there, but
You're listening to Latin American embassies?
no,
Or?
it was a joke.
Oh.
They didn't put me on a Spanish board. They put me on a Portuguese language board. So I wasn't listening to Spanish. I was listening to Portuguese, and they were all laughing. That was a good joke, I thought. A good practical joke. And I was the victim. So I think I spent, I don't remember, a year or two there, probably 1 year. And I volunteered to go down to Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were transferred from the Washington, D.C. area. We were living in a rented house in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
we went down to Puerto Rico and spent 2 years there. And that was a good experience. We did a lot of beach time.
What were you doing in your job in Puerto Rico? What was the purpose of being there?
I was assigned to a squad that was supposed to keep track of the espionage aspect of the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic was having a lot of trouble. One of their chief bureaucrats got assassinated, and 200 people died during the investigation of who killed him.
200 people died because they were
just terrorists, more or less. The investigators were the terrorists. So I was assigned to one Dominican Republic guy who was in charge of that investigation that ended up with 200 witnesses dying. And I don't think I did much good, really. I tried, but I'm not sure
Do you feel like you made a positive impact in the world in your role in the FBI as a whole?
Oh, yes, yes. After our 2 years in Puerto Rico, I got offered a job in the FBI laboratory in Washington.
Forensics?
Forensic lab, yeah. And the reason was because I studied math and science in college. And while I was a policeman, I went part-time to the University of California in their School of Criminology. So between the science and the criminology, they thought I'd be a good fit for the lab. So I was assigned to the laboratory, and I spent the major part of my FBI career in the laboratory. I was put into an apprenticeship in the documents section, question documents.
Looking for forged signatures or?
Yeah, handwriting identification, signature forgery, altered contracts, anything to do with paper and ink.
So I've known this about your life and therefore my dad's life, but there was a lot of moving around, especially in the FBI position.
Yes.
And I'm curious how that was for you, because there is some part of this family that is very stable. Like we have been in Berkeley longer than we've had this house, which was built in 1905.
And this house was built in 03.
03. And so you've always had a specific connection to place, and then you moved a lot for a lot of years. And what was that like?
The FBI sent us around a lot. And I remember Basin had been in 6 schools before he graduated from the 2nd grade.
Yeah.
But I think our success, if we've had success, we've had success, was that we saw these moves as adventures. Some FBI families saw them as terrible inconveniences and ugly and difficult. But I think Granny and I kind of saw that as going to Puerto Rico was a big adventure. And many families hated it, but we loved it.
Yeah. So that was the lesson there.
Yeah. Attitude has a lot to do with success in this regard.
So you started at the forensics labs, and where?
Where?
Where did you start doing forensics? I forget. Where did you start the forensics portion of the job?
When?
Where?
In Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C.
Yeah. They only have one lab. That's in Washington.
Okay.
It's now, they built a big, huge facility down at the Marine base at Quantico. But it was in Washington, D.C. We rented a house in Alexandria. It was a 2-year apprenticeship. But they had a very clever way of conducting the training. Each new guy, each room had 2 desks. And in each room was an old-timer, experienced guy and an apprentice. and they worked together. And what would happen is a case would be assigned to the old timer, and when it was ready, it was put in to be examined, and the apprentice would go over and take a case, open it up, work the case, write a report, and put it back. And then the old timer would pull it out. He would work the case, write his official report, and then we could compare the reports. And I thought that was a very, very good. It held its student responsible. It was very objective. You could see the differences or similarities.
And how did you find working with your old-timer partner? Was it?
Well, it was interesting because each old-timer had a different personality. And some guys I had very, very little respect for. I don't remember all the different details, but I do know. And some I had great respect for, just admired their ability. In another segment of video, we talked about my writing the rubber stamp book, and Jim Cadigan was one of the old timers that I really respected. And so besides the normal casework, he had up in the attic of the building a little laboratory all about rubber stamps. You could make rubber stamps. And in our culture, we don't have many rubber stamps. But he gave a training session, and I caught on, ended up spending a lot of time up in that little upstairs lab.
Pretty funny to be in a bureaucracy and have this symbol of interest be a rubber stamp.
Yeah. But he would teach me how to make a rubber stamp, this temperature, this pressure. And then he'd say, okay, now on the next stamp you make, use too much pressure. And on the one after that, don't use enough pressure. And then on the next one, use too much heat and don't use enough heat. And so I made and broke rubber stamps.
Was that rather like scientific glass blowing? Learning the physical?
A practical exercise which you may never apply.
Interesting. So you had 2 years of training.
2 years of an apprenticeship. And the last 6 months was what we called moot court. You were preparing as a forensic scientist to make presentations in court, be an expert witness. So you had 6 months of a moot court training. And what they would do is they would give you a case, you'd examine the case, wrote the report, and then the old timers would be the judge and the prosecutor and the defense, and they would ask you every difficult question. So in that 6 months, you really learned a lot about how to be a good expert witness.
And what did you learn? Did you learn how to present a specific side strongly, or did you learn how to kind of explore what possible truths could be? Like, what was the purpose of that? What do you think that they were trying to get you to accomplish in that training?
Well, the whole purpose was to get you prepared to answer questions from the prosecutor who's on your side and for the defense attorney who's against you. It was a pretty good training session. On my last moot court of the 6 months, they says, we're not going to graduate you. You have to have another moot court. And I said, well, why? It says, because you're not taking this seriously enough. you have to be more down to earth. So I said, okay, I can do that. But I'm quite sure it was a good preparation, because whenever I testified as an expert witness, I had all the confidence in the world. I thought to myself, I know more about this than everybody in this room. And an interesting story, after I retired, Granny and I were on a sailboat. I got a subpoena to testify as an expert witness for a case I handled before I retired up in New York City. It was a mafiosa case. And at the trial attorneys at the prosecutor's bench was an old friend of mine. He was an FBI agent who was helping with the prosecution, Art Eberhardt. And he was in the gambling unit. I guess it was a mafioso numbers racket or something. I don't know. So I testified, and Art Eberhard was at the table right there with the prosecutor. And the backstory is, whenever Art testified, we always got a complaint from the judge or the prosecutor. Says, oh, Art's got a terrible attitude. He's argumentative. He doesn't have any. It was always complaining. And I was Art's supervisor at that time. I said, Art, what are you doing? Why are you always get complaints? He says, they piss me off. So Art's there watching me testify. And the next day he says, I watched you testify. He says, I'm going to change my style. Oh, another story. At that same trial, after I testified, I was sitting at a bench in the hallway waiting for him to come out. And before Art came out, the mafiosa guy came out. And he looked at me, he says, hey, you did a good job.
And you were testifying against him. I mean,
I was testifying against him. He says, you did a good job. I want you to look at my will. He says, you're not going to be in it, but I want you to look at it. And I thought that was hilarious.
So you were in forensics in DC, and then what? Is that when you became
Well,
a
I spent only a few years after my apprenticeship as a working document examiner. They then sent me down to the FBI Academy at Quantico to be a forensics instructor. And so I spent, I think, 5 years at the FBI Academy as an instructor. And that was a great job.
Why?
Well, you only had an hour or two of class each day. Sometimes you only had 3 or 4 hours a week. And so I played a lot of tennis, did a lot of jogging.
So you got to being a teacher, just the long way around.
That's right. I got to be a teacher. That was a very, very easy job, good job, cleaned, nobody shooting at you.
Yeah.
I volunteered to be in what they call the inspection staff. There was a crew would go to each field office all over the country and do an inspection. Are they following procedures? Are they doing the filing in the right way? Or it was a team that nobody wanted to see arrive because the job usually ended up in several agents getting in trouble for not doing the job right. But that 6 months assignment was a requirement before you could be promoted to be a supervisor. And I wanted to be a supervisor in the lab. So I volunteered for the inspection staff thinking I would get promoted in the lab. But they didn't promote me in the lab. They sent me to Miami as a squad supervisor. I was the supervisor of the rapid response team. We investigated bank robberies and kidnappings.
And this was the 70s?
Yes. This was in the late 70s, almost the 80s.
So you weren't teaching anymore, you were back in the
I'm back in the field as a investigator. Well, the supervisors didn't investigate. The supervisors were supposed to be just administrative matters, writing up efficiency reports for the guys on your squad. So one of the major things that happened to me while I was the supervisor of the rapid response team down in Miami was that we got a call in the office. I was in the office, a phone call came in, and it was a woman who says, my husband is an FBI fugitive, and he's here now, and he's on drugs, and he's armed. Come get him. Come
Yeah.
arrest him.
At her home.
At where she lived, at his home.
Yeah.
So I got on the radio. I says, anybody on my squad, please respond. We're going to meet at such and such an address as quickly as possible. So I got in a car, got a couple of guys from the office, and we went there. And the address was on an upper story apartment. And the bad news was the next block was an elementary school that had just been let out, and the kids were pouring down here.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh my God. So I sent a couple of guys up and stop them or redirect them. Don't let them come down here. Then I'm thinking to myself, geez, I've got all these guys. What do I do? So right next to me was Ben Grogan, a good friend of mine. We sat next to each other in New Agents Trading. And he was the previous supervisor of this unit. He's an experienced SWAT guy. So I said, Ben, you got any suggestions? How should we approach this? And he says, well, let's get some guys in the back of that house. So we radioed, and some guy says, okay, we'll respond, we'll go back. He says, we're just going to have to go up those stairs on the side of the building and knock on the door.
Was the woman in danger? Or?
Oh, yeah, she was
Yeah,
still in the
okay.
apartment as far as I...
So you couldn't just watch the exits and wait an hour for the kids to go away?
Yeah.
Well, I don't even
Gosh,
know the details.
I don't remember if she was in the house still or if she had left. I never saw her if she was. I guess she
Anyways.
wasn't in the house.
So
Well,
you-
anyway, Reddy Franco, Ben Grogan, and I, and another guy whose name I don't recall, he was a new agent. We went up the side of the stairs, and there are two glass doors with a concrete pillar in the middle. So Reddy Franco climbed over the balcony facing this way. Ben and the other guy stayed a little bit down the stairs. And I put my back right on that concrete pillar. So there's a door on one side and the door's on the other side. So Reddy Franco was a Spanish speaker. So he knocked on the door, FBI, FBI, open up. And with that, we could hear a gunshot. The guy had shot down toward the FBI agents in the street.
Mm-hmm.
And then apparently he ran through the house and threw himself bodily through the glass door. It came right through the door. Reddy Franco shot twice, and the guy fell flat. Ben Grogan shot once or twice. So when we find out he's dead, they're starting to look through my clothing to see if there's any bullet holes. One bullet hit the concrete pillar in back of me and went this way. Didn't touch my clothing. And the other bullet that Ben Frank, like the wind blew my pants, but didn't. So I didn't have any more holes in me at the end of the day than I had.
Were you ever shot or stabbed or injured in the service?
No, that was the only FBI shooting experience I had.
Uh-huh. What do you think you learned in that position, or what lessons did you take from teaching?
Well, I have the feeling to this day that I was not a good supervisor. I guess I didn't understand the full scope of my responsibilities. To this day, I'm bothered by one guy on my squad who almost did nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I kept waiting for him to turn in his reports, and I ask myself now, why didn't I approach him and demand more?
So you think it was a failure on the human aspect, the communication, or like technical, or what do you don't know, or what?
Good question. Huh. Well, I guess that I didn't have a good concept of what a supervisor was supposed to do. I went through the motions and did what was required, but that, in my opinion today, wasn't sufficient.
It didn't feel intuitive to be managing people.
One interesting thing was that right at that time, we got our first female FBI agents. And a great big tall black woman was assigned to my squad. She was a good looking gal and friendly. But what I noticed was that she did the minimum amount of work. The way the FBI was organized that time is you'd get a letter from another office and say, well, we're investigating this case and we need somebody to knock on the door at such and such an address and see if they know where so-and-so is. Mm-hmm. So that would be a case assignment, and that case would be assigned to the people on my squad. So she got the normal amount of assignments. Well, what she would do is she would knock on the door, ask for somebody, and then write back and say, oh, he wasn't there. And it kept going on. A very similar response from her. So I told her, I had to sit her down and have a talk. I says, your job is not to simply answer that question you get from the other office. Your job is to solve the crime. So you have to do more. You have to say, well, where is he? And what's he doing now? And where can we find him? And you have to dig into each case.
Was that management style effective or that?
Yeah, she said, they didn't tell us that in basic training.
And you got better work out of her?
Yeah. So that was a success.
How do you think other people felt about your leadership?
Well, I had a variety of guys on my squad. Two old-timers, Ed Putz and Dan Sweet, who had spent years and years and years as agents in New York. Tough office. So now they're in Miami in semi-retirement. And I felt intimidated by their years of experience. And then we had the other guy who didn't do anything.
Did you feel like there was a lot of overlap between leading students through coursework and maybe being a father to a family of children and leading that kind of realm and leading in the office? Or did they feel pretty different?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I'm saying, like, were there certain skills or lessons that you took from being a father and leading children into this world, and being a teacher and leading students through a course, and being a supervisor and leading an office? Or did those feel pretty separate to you? Do you feel like they took different skills or similar skills, I guess?
I'd say very different.
Why?
Well, being a father, being a husband, is based on love and caring and wanting those people to be their best. At work, I didn't much care whether they succeeded or not. They were just doing a job. And some of them let them know. They said, I don't care about this job. Yeah. It's just a job.
Did you ever feel that way about your job?
In general, no. I think at one time, yes. When I finished my 2 years in Miami, I got sent back to the FBI Academy at Quantico as a unit chief. That was the promotion I was looking for. That was a grade 15.
So you said, I don't feel like a great manager. Let me go up in management.
An opening came up for a unit at the FBI Academy, and the guy in the head of the academy had a guy picked out that he wanted to take that job, and I got sent there instead.
So a little hostile right from the beginning, maybe?
So he was antagonistic with my being in that job. And he immediately, even before I arrived, he started dividing that unit up and giving this job here and that job there. So when I got there was very, very little to do. And everybody in the academy knew what was going on.
Did you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, sure. It was so obvious.
So you'd say during that period, it felt like it was a job and you were just trying to get your job done
Yeah.
and less passion.
So I did the best I could with what work there was to do.
Mm-hmm.
I even had one great success. The unit was what was called the Field Police Training Unit. In each office all over the country, there were 1 or 2 or 3 guys who were designated police trainers, and they would put on courses for local police. When I was a policeman here, the firearms training I got was from the FBI instructor. So I was in charge of all of the guys who were field police instructors. And over the years, the budget got less and less and less and less and less. So it came time for me, as the unit chief of that, to go to the headquarters. And my job was to discuss with them the Field Police Training Unit. And so I made a little preparation, and I went to them and I says, in case you guys don't know the history, the Field Police Training Unit is getting less and less money every year. Here's was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, last year. I says, look, it's just going down and down. I says, if you don't want this unit, don't fund it, stop it. But if you want it, you have to put in sufficient funds. So that was the first year we got a raise. My presentation was successful. Well, after 2 years as a grade 15 there at the academy, an opening came up back at the lab in the document unit. And that's what I wanted to do all along. So I applied for that transfer. And interestingly enough, the guys who didn't go into the inspection unit and didn't leave, there was a requirement. You had to leave in order to get the promotion. So I applied, and the guys who wanted the job but never left, they wrote a memorandum and says, oh, Gary's been gone from the lab too long. He's no longer qualified, and our man is better suited. And so I wrote a counter memo. This goes to the career unit, to the career board. I says, if you check my personal records, you'll see that my goal for my entire last 10 years was to get promoted in the lab. And the reason I left was to get promoted in the lab, as you guys required. So I got it. But a funny thing happened there. Bobby Gillen was the section chief. And I think we had 3 units under him, 3 unit chiefs. And he wanted the unit chiefs not to work cases. At that time, the unit chiefs worked cases and supervised the squad. He says, I don't want unit chiefs working any more cases. I want you to spend your whole time in administration. Well, that was easy. You just stopped deciding on cases. But he was reluctant to release his authority, so they didn't leave us any administrative work. So for 2 years, my last 2 years in the FBI, I had almost nothing to do. I couldn't work cases, and he wouldn't let us administrate. And I kind of took over as a mentor, a psychological mentor for several people in the lab. And apparently suited them, because they kept coming to me. Much like the work Basin's doing now, I guess. The separation between headquarters in Washington and the agents in the field was vast. There was a distinction that was very, very ineffective. And the worst example I remember, a little backstory. Agents were expected to work overtime every day. You came in early and you left late. And you got paid a standard amount every month.
Salary that didn't include that overtime.
Salary and overtime pay.
Okay.
And for some reason, it was very difficult to administrate. Some guys would turn in a lot, and other guys would turn. So headquarters, in their wisdom, sent out to the whole field a memo that says, from now on, every agent is expected to get more than the office average in overtime. It was an impossible requirement.
Yeah, that's
you
hilarious.
can't have everybody be over the average.
That's funny.
But I thought that was a good example.
Yeah.
There's a book, a humorous book about the FBI called No Left Turns.
Mm-hmm.
I still may have that book, but it's funny. But it's a whole bunch of stories about silly things like that.
That's funny. I'm trying to synthesize like what you learned from that kind of.
Well, I guess one of the main lessons was that bureaucracies aren't always efficient. Sometimes bureaucracies are the opposite of efficiency. J. Edgar Hoover was the director of the FBI for way too many years. He was in that position for 42 years. And he could be in charge of a little post office, and he could be the best postmaster. But in 42 years, any little bad habit he has is going to be, I mean, if he never dusted the top of the cabinet in 42 years, the dust is going to be that thing. I think he began to think that he was omnipotent, and he surrounded himself with yes men and made some serious errors. I'll give you an example. Each agent had in the field 2 manuals. There was the Manual of Investigative Techniques, and each of the 261 laws, there was a section. Here's what the elements of this crime are. Here's how you go about it. Here's the first step. Here's the second step. Look out for this. Look out for that. And it was a very, very helpful manual. If you've got a case of the type you'd never had before, you'd go right to that manual, and you'd get a really good guide as to how to proceed. The other manual we had was the administrative manual, and that was the list of do's and don'ts. It was almost entirely filled with don'ts. If an agent made a mistake, made an error, headquarters would write up a couple of pages that you are prohibited from doing this, you can't do this, this is prohibited. And so the manual was this thick, and it was all things you shouldn't do or couldn't do, to the point where whatever you did, you were violating some rule. You couldn't do anything without violating some rule. So the agents were constantly vulnerable to being chastised or demoted or transferred, and it was impossible to follow all the rules. So everybody knew that one manual was very helpful and one manual was destructive to good order.
So you moved back to the promotion at the lab, and then what?
Well, I spent 2 years as a supervisor of a unit in the lab, then faced retirement.
How did that feel after all those years working?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good feeling. Granny and I sold our house and bought a 41-foot sailboat and spent 2 years on the sailboat.